Telling me to let me just let me
That clock keeps ticking like a metronome, and my thoughts keep telling me to get me home, but my balls keep telling me to let me just let me
Today I thought I would compare two icons, bracelet icons. Both of these styles of bracelets have been worn extensively over 50 plus years. They have both stood the test of time. They've both been designated for two very different scenarios. And I think it's fascinating to see that these two bracelets are synonymous in the world as being Rolex style bracelets. And I thought I'd break down the comparison between these two, looking at it from a design perspective, sort of showing you why I believe both of them are useful for different scenarios and why I recommend both of them for different occasions. So before I get into the comparison, I thought I would just break down these two watches and what they're trying to represent. This is the Jubilee Ocean Rover, one of the first watches that I owned and a cornerstone of my channel. It is homaging the Rolex Mil Sub, which is a style of Submariner that was used in the late 60s and the early 70s, specifically given to the British military. And what I've decided to do is put it on a rivet style Oyster bracelet for the sake of this video, sort of giving it that vintage appeal, something that is very true to form of what this style of case is all about. And on the wrist, it is superb. It fits extremely well, very light, very wieldy, very comfortable, very low in profile. And I think it's a fascinating combination to have the two together. The next piece that I'm going to be showing you is the Alpha Daytona, which is the chronograph that I'll be reviewing. Now, if you know anything about Paul Newman Daytonas and the hype that is around those models, you'll understand what this is homaging. This is homaging a very vintage style watch. And what I decided to do is to put it on a Jubilee bracelet, which is something that it came standard with back in the day, if you were lucky enough to get one. Same thing, very interesting combination, very comfortable to wear, very vintage in its aesthetic, and solely the reason why I decided to compare these two models together is because these two bracelets sort of fit the build when it comes to the timeline that they were based in. So let's get into some more details and break down a comparison between them both. So before I begin comparing these two, I thought I would give a whimsical analysis of them both. The Oyster style bracelet I would call the veteran. The Jubilee style bracelet I would call the granddad or the grandfather. And if you know anything about the history of these two bracelets, you'll understand what I mean when I say that. The Oyster bracelet is synonymous with sports utility Rolex style watches. It is an icon. It has been worn for an extended period of time on watches specifically used as tools. So dive watches were very synonymous with this style of bracelet. And during the late 50s and the early 60s, when this bracelet was brought around, it was scorned by a lot of people because it was very light, very, very light. As you can see, the profile of this bracelet is extremely thin. It had a expandable feature to it. It was almost spring-loaded, so it could fit more comfortably on the wrist. They were very fidgety. They weren't perfect. But nowadays, from the late 70s onwards, the Oyster style bracelet became a very popular item. And when it came to wearing watches of this kind, it was used extensively. When I say veteran, I mean to say that this bracelet has been used in warfare. It has been used by sporting professionals. It's been used by diving professionals. So it really has a reputation. And the modern style Oyster bracelet today is extremely popular on the newer models, specifically because they are really well engineered and they've been designed extremely accurately. So in comparison, the Jubilee style bracelet is very different in a sense that it was always equipped on more dressier style models. The Datejust, the Day Date, the GMT, and the Daytona were four of the models that were extremely popular with this piece. Now, of course, people changed out. Some people put the Jubilees on Submariner style watches, but mostly when we look at the Datejust, for example, the Jubilee is synonymous with that model. And I call it the grandfather or the granddad because nowadays that's the style of bracelet you see on elderly men because it was just something that was so, once again, iconic in the time and still is to this day. Now, as you can see by Rolex's development nowadays, they are bringing these styles of bracelets back in a much bigger number. The new GMT that's just been released has now been equipped with a Jubilee style bracelet, but with a Oyster style flip lock and safety clasp. So fascinating that there's been a revival. And of course, a lot more people enjoy the Oyster style bracelet, and the Jubilee bracelet is a little bit more of a product of its time. But in saying that, I think they both deserve merit, and now I'm going to get into the comparison and look at them both from a design perspective. So with that being said, let's get into comparing these two styles of bracelets. Now what I've done is make 5 keywords that I'm going to be using for both of them, and sort of going through them individually, and then I'll bring them up separately and compare them together. So the 5 keywords I've used for the Oyster style bracelet are simple, subtle, functional, sturdy, and modern. Now all of that pertains to the construction of the bracelet. Being a 3-link construction, it is very synonymous with this style of bracelet, being the Oyster bracelet. It is a lot stronger than its counterpart. It can be used for many different occasions, most notably being used for something more of a more demanding activity, like sport, like swimming, anything active. Because of its construction, it is a lot stronger in its build. And of course, this being a vintage style bracelet, I wouldn't say that this is exactly sturdy. But when we look at the modern incarnations, you can see what I mean when I say that it's a lot more functional in that form. Being a simple bracelet in comparison, it is not highly polished, it's not rounded, it's very flat, it doesn't catch the light. All it intends to be is an extension to the watch head and something that goes around your wrist. And the bonus about it is that it's very low in profile. If I just fit it to my wrist again, we can see just how well it fits on the wrist in profile. It really doesn't scream or shout what it is to anyone. Very basic. And when I say modern, what I mean to say is that the whole notion of less being more has made this a very iconic style of bracelet, because it really doesn't consist of many things. Of course, without the rivets and without the hollow center links, the 3-link construction has really been a cornerstone for a lot of pieces nowadays, and bracelets all over the world from different brands and different companies all incorporate a simple structure like this, and I would say it's in part due to the Oyster style bracelet. Now in comparison to that, the Jubilee style bracelet, the 5 words I've chosen are complex, extravagant, fashionable, comfortable, and vintage. So let me try and break that down for you. Firstly, the construction being complex, a 5-link construction. All right, and to add on top of that, being something that's fashionable and extravagant, it attracts attention in its form. It's a lot more rounded. It's not flat in profile. It catches the light a lot better, which also draws the eye more to the dial, which is quite interesting. But for an everyday wearing watch, it is a lot more interesting to look at. It does add a much more of a dressy appeal to its overall aesthetic. Now, it's not as sturdy and strong as the Oyster style bracelet. It was never considered to be a bracelet that was going to be a utility in a circumstance like diving or active wear. But of course, people do that nowadays. People wear these everywhere. So just on a comparison scale, this is a lot more light, a lot more, chintzy in its makeup. And the problem with complexity in comparison to simplicity, and I'll bring this up just to show you, is that complexity, there's a lot more room for failure, right? The more moving parts you have, the more articulation you have, the better of the likelihood that something will break. And for something that needs to be more functional than aesthetic, you want less parts. So that very basically sums up the comparison between the two. When I say comfortable, I mean to say that because it articulates so much in its form, it is much more comfortable on the wrist. It is very light, very wieldy. There's more space for air to flow through. I personally find the Jubilee bracelets are a lot more comfortable to wear, and I'm sure I'm not the only one. And then talking about vintage as opposed to modern, this style of bracelet sort of has the air of a different time. You know, the age of opulence, a different time period altogether. It looks dated in comparison to the Oyster style bracelet. Of course, this is my opinion, but I know a lot of people say the same, that they feel that the Jubilee bracelet is a very outdated style of bracelet, that in comparison to the Oyster, which is much more iconic for a modern period, this is a bit outdated. So having these two watches side by side again, it's fascinating seeing that in our modern age, these two bracelets are still so present and so popular. The fact that Rolex are still reintroducing these styles of bracelets, they are making modern incarnations of them. It's great to see. And really, at the end of the day, it's down to personal preference of which you enjoy. My personal preference is I enjoy the Jubilee bracelet. I think it may be because I see the Oyster bracelet so much, it's become so popular that it's almost boring to look at. But that just is an example of good design. Good design can be extremely boring, but it's also something that really does stand the test of time. And in comparison, like I've said, that this bracelet is a lot more modern in its construction, and that is simply because less is more tends to be a lot more of a interesting dynamic than having more for the sake of it. But the Jubilee bracelet I find is a lot more comfortable. I find it's a lot more interesting to look at. It just adds a little bit of extra dynamism to the overall watch, especially when you're working with something simple like a chronograph. It's nice to have something that is a little bit more interesting to its overall build. And I think that the Jubilee bracelet integrates a lot better into the cases of the watches. That might just be me. Any designer would say no, the Oyster bracelet integrates better with the case because the lines are flush and because it all fits. It looks almost like a whole piece. But I enjoy that bit of separation, combination between the two. They're like polar opposites. They really are. These two bracelets are very, very different. But in saying that, it's all up to personal preference. What you enjoy, what you prefer. Both are superb. Both are very fit for purpose. But for my taste, I think that the Jubilee outweighs the Oyster for many reasons that I've already said. But thank you for watching this abbreviated clip. I've tried to keep it as short as possible. If you've been keeping track of the time on the watches, you'll find that I've been spending a lot of time tripping over my words. And like this video, which is the whole summary about simplicity and complexity, keeping it basic is what counts at the end of the day. So thank you very much for watching this episode, and I hope to see you in the next one. And to all my new subscribers, thank you for joining. I'll be sure to bring more content very soon. Cheers for now.